that's the right run, 6 o'clock. So I'm going to call this special meeting to order. Would you all please rise as you are able for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Madam Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Councilmember Dean.
Here.
Councilmember Ferrar-Rivas.
Present.
Present.
Thank
I have
you.
to remember to push the button.
Councilmember Wellender.
Here.
Vice Mayor Gurney.
Present.
Mayor Lowe.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a special meeting, and a special meeting is one that is called for one item, and so we have one item for discussion. It's a rather important one, and I want to thank you for attending. I think we will take public comment at this time. I'm looking at, it doesn't matter if we do or not at this
We
time.
don't need to give an opportunity for general public comment, but after we introduce the housing element, then we
I was wondering because it's only one item.
correct.
Okay.
Because
so,
it's a special meeting.
Yeah, it's a special meeting. So we will take public comment during the item. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to turn this over to the staff report to walk us through this item. Thank you so much for our planning director. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. Tonight we have before you the City of Sonoma 2023 to 2031 housing element recommended for your adoption this evening, and we have worked together in partnership with De Novo Consulting Firm, and we have Perry Banner, who is here from the firm, to be presenting this evening. But I just want to kind of give a little bit of background of recent months. The draft housing element was submitted to the state in October, and they had a 90-day review period in which to return comments to the city. The end of that review period was on January 24th. So, but because that pushed us very close to the deadline, which is today, of adoption that is required by the state, we set up a meeting with our Housing and Community Development reviewer from the state in early January, on January 12th. And so with the consultant and our staff team, we talked through all the recommendations at that time, or most of them at that time, and that allowed our consultant to get ahead of it and to start working on the changes to address those comments. And then we received our comment letter on the 24th, which is in your packet, and we proceeded to finish addressing all the comments there. So tonight we'll have Perry come up and go through the background of the housing element, as well as how we address the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Mayor Lowe, members of the City Council, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So yes, of course, tonight is one item on the agenda, consideration of the 2023 through 2031 housing element for the City of Sonoma. I'll speak a little bit more about the timeline, although Laura gave you a good summation already. But of course, we did have that public review period. Got a great many comments from the public, which we incorporated into the housing element. Sent the document off for HCD's review. It was a 90-day review period. Received the document back just recently. Here we are in January for the adoption hearings. We were at Planning Commission on January 10th, and tonight, of course, City Council consideration. We anticipate that HCD will take the full 60 days to re-review the document, after which time we'll get the document certified, and then we'll start implementing the housing element. A little bit of background, of course. The housing element is one of 7 mandatory elements in your general plan. It is the city's plan to accommodate housing over the 8-year planning horizon for existing and future residents, and of course to address the housing needs of all segments of the community. It establishes the goals, policies, and programs that are based on all that background information that we've done to prepare the housing element, and really sort of lays out the plan for providing housing during that planning cycle. And it is required to be certified by the Department of Housing and Community Development. So your housing element consists really of two main parts. The housing plan, like I say, is that blueprint of how do we implement the housing element, lays out the goals and programs and implementation programs. And then the background report is all that work that we did. We did the housing needs assessment, did a constraints analysis on governmental and non-governmental constraints. We looked at the resources that were available to the city for the provision of housing, and that included not just land, but financial resources. And that, in the document, includes your sites inventory, which I'll speak to a little bit more in a bit. A new kind of chapter that was required this year in housing elements is this chapter dedicated to affirmatively furthering fair housing. In previous housing element cycles, that might have represented a paragraph or two. Now that analysis was much more intense and really provided the bulk of your graphics in your document. We did an evaluation of your the fifth cycle housing element, and of course there's a few appendices that are attached to the document. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, first to receive and consider public input, then to consider the Planning Commission's recommendation, which was to adopt the housing element, and then for the City Council, upon review of the housing element, to approve a City Council resolution to adopt the sixth cycle housing element that considers the Planning Commission's recommendation, HCD's findings, that's consistent with the general plan, and that's compliant with state housing law. So how do we meet Sonoma's housing needs? So I'm sure you're all aware that the City of Sonoma is a member of the Association of Bay Area Governments. They're the regional government or regional association of governments. And at the beginning of this planning cycle, what ABAG does is they develop a methodology to distribute all the housing needs for the region amongst the cities and counties that are within the jurisdiction. So each city and county receives a fair share based off of this methodology. And the regional housing need is that city's jurisdiction. I mean, in Sonoma, like every other city or jurisdiction, needs to figure out how to accommodate those housing needs. As I mentioned, this planning period is from 2023 through 2031. It's an 8-year planning cycle. And Sonoma needs to identify sites that have the realistic probability of developing over that 8-year period. I like to say that we need to kind of set the table. The city's not going to construct those units, but we need to make sure that we've laid the foundation for development to occur in the city. And this year, for this cycle rather, the city has a RENA allocation of 311 units, which is more than you've received in past planning cycles. And that's across the board in California. Pretty much every jurisdiction received 3 to 4 times the amount that they were used to in the 4th and 5th cycle. And I've worked in cities and urbanized areas where they're receiving 10,000 units that they need to accommodate in a fully built-out city. So it's it might seem like a hard task for Sonoma to achieve its 311, but at least you have the vacant and non-vacant sites that are zoned to accommodate such. I talked earlier about our sites inventory, and part of this, the big part of this, and something that HCD is really sort of zeroing in on, I would say 2 things that HCD is scrutinizing for this cycle. The sites, they're looking at every individual site, and they're also looking at the city's analysis for fair housing. So when it comes to the sites, and when we're selecting the sites for an inventory, there's some criteria that HCD has laid out. Sites need to be big enough, but not too big. Look at all the constraints that are on those sites, both physical and environmental. Need to determine if the sites are vacant or non-vacant. If they're non-vacant, are they underutilized to a point where there's the possibility of redeveloping for a more intense use? And as I mentioned, HCD has provided all this guidance and will be taking has taken a very close look at these sites. I know this is a small table to look at. This is also in the housing element, of course. Just in a nutshell, what this is when we did this analysis and we started off with this 311 units that the city was allocated, what we were allowed to do was to take credit for some of the projects that were in the pipeline. That helped to reduce the RENA a little bit. We were able to project out the accessory dwelling units that we anticipate being constructed during this planning period, and then sort of add those to the capacity. And then at that point, where we have a remaining RENA, that's when we needed to go out and look at the sites that were available. And as I mentioned, we looked at vacant sites that were zoned for residential, and we looked at non-vacant sites that were available or zoned for to develop residential. And in this instance, and this is a good thing, the city has excess capacity, right? We've identified sites with enough capacity, more than enough capacity for the remaining RENA. And we do want this. We want this for a couple of reasons. There's still the possibility that HCD won't agree with every site that's in our inventory. And if we start losing sites, that capacity number is going to shrink. The other reason is that during the planning cycle, the city will need to monitor, it's called no net loss, right? What we've done is we have identified not only capacity for these 311 sites, but we've also spread that across the income categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And so, for example, if we've identified a site that's, we've identified it for accommodating some of the lower income RENA, there's the possibility that that site could still develop at market rate. And then the capacity of that site to develop lower income RENA is gone. That's why we want to have excess capacity, because what the city will need to do at that point is then look elsewhere. Where else in our surplus of sites do we have capacity to accommodate that number? And if we run out of capacity and we're in a no net or a net loss situation, then the city's going to have to go and look around for more sites in the middle of the planning period. So that's why it's important to have that that little bit of a buffer. It might be there's a couple of other maps that I'm going to show you in a minute. The intent of this map was to show the distribution of sites across the city. We've overlaid it on your zoning map, so it can look a little confusing. But the good thing is that the sites in the inventory are distributed across the city, which is exactly what HCD is looking for. And just from a planning perspective, we want to sort of spread the love, if you will, right? We want to identify sites that are in higher opportunity areas of the city, and just make sure that there's not any one concentration of development occurring in the city, that these development is occurring throughout the city. Just want to comment a little bit about revisions that have been made since that public draft that went out and was reviewed in August and September. As I mentioned, there's a few appendices in the document, one of which addresses public comments. A lot of those public comments got incorporated into the housing element. And that was one of the major revisions that you're seeing before you. The other had to do with an assembly bill that came out during this process. Assembly Bill 2011 now allows sites that are permitted for retail, office, and parking to be used for residential development. So what that had the effect of doing is it actually gave us a little bit more capacity in your sites inventory. I won't read this verbatim, but this is just to show primarily that we made revisions to programs based on HCD's findings. HCD was looking for more specific objectives in those programs, and they were looking for more specificity with regard to timeline and metrics. And that wasn't just specific to the city of Sonoma. That's kind of what they're looking for all these jurisdictions. So not only taking a close look at sites and affirmatively furthering fair housing, but when it comes to your implementation plan, they want you to state that we're going to do this and we're going to do this by this date and this date and that date. So we went into those housing programs and we started to provide a little bit more specificity. The other sort of major revision since that public review draft had to do with affirmatively furthering fair housing. And what I will say, I mentioned that this AFFH chapter is new to this housing cycle. I just came out of the SCAG region doing housing elements, HCD's guidance on affirmatively furthering fair housing came out in the middle of the housing element cycle down there. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve for consultants and for cities for how to address affirmatively furthering fair housing. I think we're starting to understand what HCD is looking for. So that's one of the big reasons why there were a number of revisions that needed to be done in that AFFH chapter. These are just a couple of maps actually from the fair housing analysis. The map on the left shows the city's diversity index, which is how diverse is the city with regard to race. The city's actually, it's quite diverse, relatively speaking. The map on the right is another map. It shows access to opportunities. And by opportunities, we're talking about economic, educational, and environmental opportunities. The city's has some low resources in most of the areas. The intent of affirmatively furthering fair housing is to sort of improve those opportunity scores during the planning cycle. But these two maps at least show that the dots are all how the sites in the inventory are distributed throughout the city. So the recommendation for tonight then, I'm going to get a little bit more deeper into the an overview of the review timeline. So the housing element is, what I want to say is that the adoption of the housing element, the statutory deadline is today, the 31st. The intent tonight would be to get the housing element adopted, and then the city would submit the housing element to HCD. Doesn't need to be submitted today. It could be submitted. The key is to get the document adopted, but we'll submit it within a day or two once we make sure that all the revisions are wrapped up. So we'll submit that document back to HCD. HCD, as I mentioned, will have a 60-day review period, so we anticipate getting the document back in approximately 2 months. As Laura mentioned, planning staff and de novo, we've had the opportunity to speak to our reviewers, so we got ahead of the comments that were in the HCD findings letter. So the document that you have in front of you, you'll notice that it is redlined. Those red lines are us addressing HCD's findings. So one of the what we can do tonight upon adoption is that in the event that there are any non-substantial comments that haven't been addressed, there's language in the resolution that would allow the city manager, his or her designee, to make those minor changes, so we don't have to come back to the city council after tonight, but we'll make those minor changes in our final edit to the document that will be sent to HCD. I want to talk a little bit about what's known as the builder's remedy, and this is a mechanism that would take effect if the city does not have an adopted housing element by the 31st, by tonight. What the builder's remedy is it arises from the Housing Accountability Act, and what will happen is that if the city does not have an adopted housing element that's substantially compliant with state law, then a developer could come in and they could propose a project that doesn't meet zoning code, doesn't meet the general plan, but that has a couple of criteria. The development that they're proposing would have to have at least 20% of the units available for lower income households, or 100% of the units for moderate income households. So there is that possibility that if we don't have an adopted housing element, that could occur. I don't think there's any developers lining up to do that, but that's I wanted to give you an idea of the ramifications for not adopting the housing element. So tonight, as far as the recommendation is concerned, it is recommended that the City Council authorize the City Manager to make any final iterative changes to the 2023 through 2031 housing element if necessary, based upon HCD feedback, as long as such changes do not change the policy of the city or include any legislative actions, and adopt the City of Sonoma 2023 through 2031 housing element and seek a notice of exemption. With that, I'll end the presentation and take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll do it like this. We'll get questions from the council and then open it for any public comment and then come back to the council. All right? So, questions of our consultant. I'm looking right to my right at the former planning, head of our planning committee, Mr. Wellender.
Thank you. Okay. Of our backtrack, the RENA numbers were established based upon the expressed comments from Gavin Newsom that we were so many million short of housing, and then ABAG took that and determined what that number was.
Correct. So the region gets an allocation, and then
Right.
the region then
Distributes it.
distributes it.
And there was no adjustment made by Gavin Newsom's number when it was proven to be incorrect or not factual. It was a reduced number, but was there an adjustment in distribution in the various regions? Do you know? I'm just curious.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
How many units did we actually include in our report as far as our findings? I know we only needed 311. You wanted to have a pad in there. I think if I read the chart correctly, we're at 598.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up that that too.
And I'm just concerned because, as I understand it, that in the seventh cycle of these, whatever ones we quote gave to HCD to be our numbers and our pad, that should certain numbers of those opportunities not be built, we no longer can claim them for the next cycle. Is that true?
Well, how this cycle, I don't want to project as to what HCD is going to require for the seventh cycle.
No,
but-
not numbers wise. I'm talking about individuals. In other words, just say hypothetically, we needed 311. You gave them 450.
Right.
Of those 450, 200 of the opportunities did not develop in that 8 year.
Yep.
We still may. So my question is, can we take those 200 undeveloped sites or potential sites and carry them into the next cycle?
So let me explain this. And this is how there's section of government code that relates to what you're talking about.
Okay.
So I don't want to, like I say, government code may change going
Sure,
into the seventh
sure,
cycle, but as
sure.
far as right now is
Sure.
concerned. So if the city has sites that were identified in previous housing element cycles, right? If there's a non-vacant site that was identified in a previous housing element cycle, I actually have it written right here. Okay. So for non-vacant sites that were identified in the last housing cycle, there would be, and program 20 in your housing element does just this, right? There's a handful of sites that need to go through a rezoning to accommodate where you're going. So it's for non-vacant sites that were identified in the previous housing cycle, they need to be rezoned to allow certain types of development by right. And for vacant sites that were identified in the previous two housing element cycles, the same thing applies. So in the case of Sonoma, yeah, it's just it's a handful of sites that need to be rezoned, but there is, that possibility that if we've identified sites in this housing element cycle and they don't get developed, that they might, as long as the law doesn't change, that they might be subject to the same requirements in the next housing element cycle.
So to understand this, then you're telling me is that for some of the sites that were non-vacant in the fifth cycle that were not developed, now we're obligated to upzone that, even though we met our RENA numbers.
What we need to do is that we need to apply, and you can do this via housing overlay. So what would happen is for certain types of development, and their development that comes in, and there's a percentage of affordable housing that's within that proposed development.
Our inclusion area is 25% right now.
Your inclusion area is 25%.
Our inclusion area is 25%.
You're right. But I think that, and I can bring up the government code, but there's, for projects that come in, and I think the threshold is a little lower. But if a project comes in and it meets that density and it meets that affordability requirement, then they would be allowed to be developed by right versus through a discretionary process.
And that's something from the previous cycle that wasn't developed.
Correct. either if it's a non-vacant site that was identified in the fifth cycle, or if it's a vacant site that was identified in the previous two cycles, this section of government code applies to them.
And regardless of the fact we met the RENA in the previous cycle, we still are subjected to this by right,
Under those circumstances.
under those circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to my question, how many sites of the 598 did we actually identify and are giving HCD to evaluate and hopefully not, and to get to our 311 obligation?
How many sites in total?
Well, right, in other
These-
words, we only needed to show 311 sites, so that presupposes.
Well,
that
and
we
it's not 311 sites. What it is
No,
the
311 housing opportunities, but my point is that you identified 598 opportunities. We only needed to go 311. And I was just curious, I know there needed to be a pad because
Right.
you could get into a spitting contest with HCD as far as the potential of a particular site. I just want to know is of that 590, did we give them the whole 598? So that, or did we be a little bit more conservative and say, okay, 311, we'll give them 450, and so that means we have 148 that we didn't offer up in this cycle.
Well, what I would say is that when we submitted the document to HCD for their initial 90-day review period, it's, we gave them
The whole
the full.
enchilada.
Right, the whole enchilada.
And the
so-
justification for that was, even though we only needed a 311,
Well, there's a rule of thumb, I guess, that might be going around as far as housing element adoptions are concerned. Provide 15% buffer. Some cities are going higher, some cities are going lower. And the reason we're providing that buffer is for the reasons I gave you,
yeah,
right?
right, and I agree.
Yeah.
But that's quite a buffer. It's almost twice. 311 to 598.
Let me just, I'm going to go back. I'm going to bring you,
I guess where I'm headed is that I just don't want us to jump through hoops come the seventh cycle, because it's going to go from, was 137 to 311, and who knows, it could be 515, 560, then we lost the ability to capture that 500 stood unless the law changes.
there is that possibility. I think Sonoma, as you mentioned, Sonoma's done a pretty good job of meeting its RENA goals in the previous housing element cycle, at least. So,
And that's what irritates me, the fact that we did meet it, and yet they're still imposing what I call these draconian type, demands, that even though our performance was that we contributed to housing, and it's like it's not even being recognized.
right.
So that's fine. You did what you did, so I can't take it back. The last thing that came out in my review was just that a lot of the language talked about, for instance, I can't quote it verbatim, but in essence, you're saying that one of our goals is to create equal amount of housing for all economic groups. In my 5 years sitting on the Planning Commission, I've yet to identify any development that we were able to hit the middle, the missing middle, the workforce housing, and yet we have this in our element. And I'm thinking, is it just because we have to give this to keep HCD happy?
So when HCD assigns that RENA number, that 311, it's not the city that's decided that X percent is
Right.
going to be for very low. It's HCD.
But I'm
or
talking
rather-
about workforce housing. I'm not talking about the ones that we did a very good job of meeting in the fifth cycle. I'm talking about what I call
Sure.
the workforce that we
moderate income housing.
right, and we talk about it in the housing element. But my confusion is that we have yet to produce anything like that, and yet we still have the language in there. And my question is this just language to satisfy HCD?
Well, I mean, in the fifth cycle, the city did meet some of those. I
Okay.
can't recall if you met your entire RENA, but
We did.
I'm just I can't recall if it was the RENA number or if you met the RENA numbers for all those categories.
Okay. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Wallender. All right, I'm going to go to this side and see if Mr. Ding is ready. Do you have any questions?
Yes. My question is suggestion number 311. That is if and we cannot meet this requirement. Actually, that is assumption. I pretty much for sure out in the city, it's reachable. If cannot, meet this kind of requirement, what is the consequence? Any the penalties or any we need it and applying it to next cycles? Can you?
Yeah. For every cycle, HCD is getting, they've been scrutinizing the jurisdiction's progress in meeting their RENA. It's, like I say, they've been scrutinizing it more and more every cycle. So I'll take that no net loss item that I mentioned earlier, where if the city is developing only above moderate income housing or market rate housing, right, and we start to lose our capacity for developing lower income housing in the city, then there are penalties that start to kick in, right? There's penalties might include the loss of the ability to apply for grant funding. Your housing element might start to become non-compliant, or rather inconsistent with your general plan, and then it makes the city vulnerable to a developer, protesting the general plan. And so there are definitely penalties that are getting more and more severe with each housing element cycle. So it is, and as I mentioned, with this, what we need to do here, what the city needs to do is set the table for development to occur in the city, to make it possible to identify these sites, to have zoning in place that will allow development to occur. And the programs that we have, I mean, they're meant to encourage the development of affordable housing in the city. So there are penalties that the city could face, and that's why we've identified a little bit of a buffer, programs in place to help develop housing for all income groups in the city.
Thank you. My next question is, and how the state made it actually is not, and the ABAC made this number 311 based on the current situation or future population growth, or how to estimate. Yeah.
So at the beginning of every planning cycle, and every region is different, I will say too. So the methodology that ABAG developed for its distribution of sites is different from the methodology that SCAG might use. There's similarities, right? But the methodology will be different. And the methodology.
Excuse me, SCAG.
Sorry. Sorry. SCAG is the Southern California Association of Governments.
Thank you.
So they are the equivalent in Southern California to ABAG.
Okay.
And so those methodologies are based on growth potential in the city, projections of population growth in the city, proximity to transit, proximity to other opportunities. So that's the methodology, and at the beginning of that process too, when when ABAG is developing that methodology, there's opportunity for jurisdictions to comment on the methodology that they're developing, and that's a long process as well. That is at the beginning of these housing element cycles. So it's a complicated methodology, but it's the methodology that was eventually arrived at.
Thank you. Do you think this number, RENA's number, is kind of the minimum requirement? Do you agree my the interpretation for this number, minimum requirement?
Well, I think that jurisdictions might debate that a little bit. There, as I said, I've seen jurisdictions that are fully built out that need to accommodate tens of thousands of units, and at the beginning of these distribution cycles too. There's opportunities for cities and jurisdictions to argue the numbers that they've been allocated, and there's a process for that. I'm not sure how the regions in ABAG did, but I know that the regions in the cities in Southern California, I think there are only 2 out of the 197 jurisdictions that contested, or that they had the ability to contest their numbers. Only 2 succeeded, and they were really rather minor adjustments to the RENA.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
1 second. Let's have Mr. Ding finish, and then we'll go back to you for clarification, if you don't mind. Okay.
Actually, my question, that is all. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Willender, did you have a follow-up? Microphone on, please.
I think ABAG originally gave us a number in the low 400s, and we were one of the jurisdictions that went back and argued or pleaded our case, and then it was brought down to 311. That's at least what was presented to the Planning Commission a while back. I do have. Would you like to follow?
Go ahead. We'll go, since your mic is on, and we're all gonna have our turn, so please go ahead.
Back to the net loss, because we already have an inclusionary number that's higher than anybody else in the area, 25%, the chances of us suffering a no net loss when we have a parcel site that's zoned for a certain density, for any development that's over 4 units, then this 25% kicks in. So would that not have played into the calculation as far as what exposure we have? As far as not meeting what they
Well, I
want?
would say this is that the fact that you have an inclusionary housing ordinance and that it's set at
High.
25,
It's high.
all that works to your advantage,
Right.
to meeting not only your total RENA number of 311, but the RENA that's spread across all those
Correct.
income categories,
Correct.
and helping you to avoid a no net loss situation. So all that is playing into your favor. Did it play into our determination of the sites and the site selection and that that buffer, if you will? It did not. But and here's the other thing too. I want to explain this too, as far as the sites are concerned. Something else that we need to do, or needed to do, when we were identifying these sites, is make an argument for the realistic capacity, right? And so what that is that in previous housing element cycles, HCD was accepting. If you told HCD that we're this zone that's along this transit corridor, it's all these sites are zoned for 24 units to the acre, and it was just a straight calculation. If the site is such and such big and 24 units to the acre, and here it has the potential to develop X. Well, what we needed to do this time around was show that identify what was the realistic capacity based on past progress. What was the city approving projects at before? We can't tell HCD that these sites are going to develop at 85% of maximum capacity if the sites are, the history is that they've only been developing at 50%. And in some jurisdictions, if there was no development in the city, we'd have to look for development that might be occurring in the neighboring jurisdictions and show them that there was a regional trend. And so, in the case of Sonoma, there was we were able to demonstrate that there had been progress in meeting URENA, and that we were fairly conservative in the approach that we took to the realistic capacity. So all that is playing in Sonoma's favor right now.
My last question for now is, I find it a little bit odd that the housing demands come and there's no consideration for availability of water. And I just would love, from your perspective as the consultant and much more experienced than I am, why isn't that ever given into consideration?
It is given into consideration, and there is a section in the housing element that deals with water and sewer capacity, and so and that's based off of the information that we would have received from the housing provider or the water provider, and the capacity of the sewers. So there is an analysis that was done with
So-
regard to that.
So that's married. So in other words, we have now a married water and sewer capacity that's married to the 598.
Correct. So it is in your, under the constraints section of the housing element, towards the end of the constraints section, there'll be a topic of non-governmental constraints, and this infrastructure and environmental constraints is part of that
And if that
analysis.
capacity changes within that period of time, within this 8-year cycle, is there any consideration given to that, or are we just, again, having to yield to the Sacramento on that?
Well, what's going to happen is your document is going to get certified,
Yeah.
and that's the plan for the 8-year planning horizon. You know, you won't look again at, making that comparison between what is the water and sewer capacity in the city and how does it relate to URENA.
As you can probably speculate, over the last 3 or 4 years, every housing development that's come before the planning commission here, we have a certain public voice out there saying, but what about the water? But
Right.
what about the water? And we just have no great response to that. And it just, again, seems, sketchy is not the right word. It just seems disingenuous by the state of California. So I'm it for now. Done for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if you have further questions, we'll come back to you. But now we're going over on this side. Ms. Farrar-Rivas, I know you have questions.
Yeah, so I have a question as to whether or not you received the latest letter to the City Council and the Planning Commission that was a joint letter from Generation Housing, the Sonoma Valley Collaborative, Sonoma Valley Housing Group, Greenbelt Alliance, NAACP, FHANC. Were you able to, did you receive this, and have you had a chance to look at these comments to see if how they would be able to be adjusted, how the element would be able to be adjusted for them?
I think I saw this summary that was a part of an email that was making reference to that. I can't recall. I don't know the timing of that letter.
I believe it just came in today, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's without having kind of fully digested what's in there. It's hard for me to say right now whether all those comments can be accommodated and whether they would be, they would constitute, non-substantial changes to the housing element.
So, I mean, I guess my concern is, because I would also, at this point, actually like to thank all of these organizations that have done a great amount of work in regards to really digging deep into all of these different issues that we're talking about here tonight. And that this was their final look at the element that we're trying to approve tonight. And still there's additional, not many, not a lot, but additional comments that seem to be relevant. And how do we address that? Do we look at these one by one?
They can be addressed, as we mentioned through, if this is adopted this evening, the resolution allows the city manager as designee to work with the consultant to make those, any minor changes. And so we can still edit it before it goes to HCD. So, but if you have direction this evening, it would be helpful to know.
My concern is time is not sufficient for us, because we needed to understand all these kind of valuable comments. So what a kind of time frame for us before we submit, because tonight we needed to officially approved. What is the additional time, 1 week or the 10 days, or if any flexibility, or
Well, as we talked about earlier, builder's remedy is the issue if there is not an adopted housing element. That is the potential that could happen if there's not an adopted housing element. You could take the time to go back and come back later, but it opens the city up to some risk, and that was why we came forward this evening in a special meeting.
And I think that the question tonight is, as far as the housing element that you're seeing, is it substantially compliant with HCD's findings? we've responded and addressed HCD's findings. As Laura mentioned, we will certainly take those comments into consideration, and we've got a little bit of time before we need to submit to HCD after tonight. So we will be looking at those and making amendments as necessary.
So if I could just clarify, just for process purposes, if there are comments tonight that appear to be the consensus of the council, we would have an ability, if they're substantive, to amend the housing element before it was submitted. So I'm seeing head nods, that's great. So what I would recommend for Ms. Ferrar-Rivas is to point out the ones that you feel are important for us, and let's let's ask if they're substantive or not, and see where we are with them. I mean, if that's your pleasure.
Yeah, can we get Perry a copy of this, or does he have?
I at least have the email that
You
was
have the
forwarded.
email.
Yeah.
Yes.
They just need to.
And in terms of the resolution, what we're looking at is whether or not it's a substantial modification to the housing element. There could be some substance in the modification, that's okay, but it can't be substantially modified. Otherwise, it has to go back to the planning commission again. So that's
Thank
what
you.
we're playing with.
That's what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
All right, so should I start?
Please.
Okay. So I guess, so on this, I would say under affirmative furthering fair housing is I would like to see approval or included to locate half of the very low or low income units on the east side of Sonoma. I would like to also allow modest middle unit buildings, potentially 8 units by rights in all zones. And so that may be substantial. And so also identifying possibles that contain racially restrictive covenants and upzone them to medium or high density residential or housing opportunity. I currently live in a house with those covenants, a house my husband and I would not have been able to buy if it were 1960. So I think that we're personally working against some of these biases that created inequalities in wealth. And I also, to rezone the Sebastiana agricultural production area to commercial so it can provide housing for agricultural workers. And since I just got this today, so I didn't go in and prioritize which ones were the highest, but I would say definitely, and then also, when we hear from the public, we may be able to raise some other ones up. But to also increase the frequency, I think this is very important. The meetings of the nonprofit housing developers, I don't think that would be substantial to increase those meetings from, once a year to 4 times a year. Because, when if you're going to meet once a year, nothing's going to really happen. So that would be the other one. And then just speed up the implementation of certain programs. So 1, 2, 8, 11, and 19, which are highest priorities. Can they be on a faster timeline?
So, in a nutshell, quickly, what I would say is that making a change to a program like increasing the number of meetings, non-substantial. Adjusting the timeline for the implementation of this program is non-substantial. But when we start to go into redistributing the sites across the city, definitely substantial.
But that could be done at a later date, redistributing the sites.
Well, there's the sites that are going to be submitted to HCD and that will be within your housing elements. Those are the sites that are written in stone, if you will. If you wanted to add sites to the sites inventory, then that would be one thing. But when you also mentioned rezoning of sites as well, that would be a substantial change to the housing element.
But that doesn't eliminate the possibility that at a future action by the council to rezone something could happen after the housing element is approved.
If these are things that are in addition to, right, then that's okay, because we're adding and you're, I don't know, if you want to say improving the housing element.
Right. And
But if
so
these- if
some
we-
of these things could be done at a subsequent date after the housing element is approved and be looked upon as additions to the current housing element.
Correct.
And then it would perhaps rectify what is by some a perceived imbalance as
Yeah.
to where the vacant potential parcels are.
Right.
Thank
But
you.
if we start to adjust what we've identified, and we start to say that Site X on the west side of the city is not going to accommodate lower income marina any longer because those sites are going to shift to the east side of the city, well, that is a substantial change.
Right. So we can add but not understand.
Correct.
Okay.
In order for the housing element to be adopted this evening, the substantial modifications couldn't be made.
I understand that. Yeah, thank you.
And the city generally can modify its general plan 4 times a year. So, but unless it needs to make.
Right, so there is ample opportunity for us to do more. This is the minimum that we have to do in order to meet all the requirements of the state. Some of the items that Ms. Farrar-Rivas brought up we can do, the meetings and so forth. I'm seeing head nods, and so we can get those modifications in there right away. And we have 4 times a year where we can modify our general plan to perhaps, because I looked at the map, and I see other opportunities of parcels that I'm aware of that weren't identified because I know that something's going to happen with them just because we know stuff because we live here. And, that could be a potential okay, and I have a follow-up for
Yeah.
that, but when it's my turn. But Mr.
Yes.
Dean,
I-
wait, let's finish, let me
Okay,
wait and
yep,
see, make sure
please.
that Ms. Farrar-Rivas gets all her points in here, and then we'll move on, and we'll move back to you, Mr. Ding, so
Well-
hang in there.
I guess another one I think probably is not substantial would be to join the Renewal Enterprise District by 2025, which is something that Sonoma could do. So it would be a new objective for Program 7. It would make it easier and more cost-effective as possible for builders and developers to produce the needed housing stock that aligns with community values. I mean, this is my overall concern is, I'm a numbers person actually, but numbers don't, it's the intent that matters, not just the numbers. And so it's really important, I think, to address, we have a significant need in Sonoma to meet the housing needs of the people that live and work here, whether they're very low income, or the moderate housing. And that is not, I'm not saying that from a point of view of I just think that would be a nice thing to have happen. It is essential for the health of our community and for us to have a thriving community, for us to actually be able to provide that there is housing here for the people that work here and for families, children's to have the opportunity to stay here if they would like to stay here. I mean, it's basically a crisis. So I think that we need to, look at putting out to the public that we're taking the road to really let them know that we are seriously addressing this. And we're not, to me, it's not just meeting the regulations of the state. I've spent years meeting regulations of the SEC. It wasn't about those regulations. It was about what is the right and proper thing to do in service to your clients, where our clients are the people that live and work in Sonoma. So we want to do what is right for them. So that's where I want to make sure that the intent as we're approving this really makes a strong statement to the people of Sonoma that this council really cares about those issues and that we are going to address them. Even if we can't have to approve this tonight, without adding things in because of their issues of them being substantial. And that's all.
If I may, I just wanted to respond to one. You had an earlier comment, or not a comment, but it was sent via email about what I think you saw an inconsistency in the housing element as far as the inclusionary housing requirements are concerned. And I just wanted the council to know that there was maybe some confusion with the 25% inclusionary housing requirements and a 20% number that appeared in Program 20. I don't want to conflate the two. They're very separate. Program 20 refers to a section of government code that speaks to what Councilmember Wellender was talking about earlier, about those sites that identified in previous housing element cycles. And if someone comes in and they have a development that has 20% affordable housing, then they can do that development by right.
Got it.
It's independent, they're separate from the inclusionary housing
Understand.
requirements. Okay.
Thank you very
And-
much
And
for that.
otherwise, everything is internally consistent as far as inclusionary housing is concerned in the document.
Thank you.
Okay, so with the document that you have and that Laura has, so is your suggestion to include the things that are can be included from this that you mentioned before we turn it in? And okay, and I'm seeing head nods, and we'll come back to the
I'd like some
council.
discussion on
No,
those,
for
though.
sure. We're going to come back, but I just wanted to clarify what it is she's asking for. Okay, Mr. Ding.
Yes, in addition to Patricia's and the comments based on today's email, I do have another a piece of the land specific, and also maybe you can give us some advice. This land owned in the Napa Road, East Napa Road, and the 50th Street in the east, that corner, and 2 acres. And right now is in the Lulo district. Lulo in the zoning. It's possible to change it to residential.
So this is a
That
site.
is within the city limit, and but I didn't see in your inventory list. I didn't
So
see.
if I understand you correctly, this is a site that you're aware of that you did not see in the site's inventory, but that you would like included in the site's inventory.
that one's in
Are you talking
the
about
influence of the sphere.
yeah, it's within our sphere of
Yeah.
influence, but
It's
it
not
is
in
not
the
in our
city.
city limits. And it currently is zoned for housing. And in fact, there was a project that came before the planning commission for that specifically, and the big concern was a study. The big concern is that it hasn't been annexed in to the city, and in order for him to move forward, that would have been annexed in because we provide the services for it. And there was a big outcry by the neighbors about some concerns about traffic and safe exit because of the density and fire. But that is in the sphere of influence, but it is not in the city limits. And I'm not sure if you can include opportunities in the sphere of influence or just simply in the city limits.
Within your city limits, within your boundaries. I would say this, though, if the site is within your sphere of influence and there's the possibility of it getting annexed into the city over the 8-year planning cycle, some of these sites you may want to sort of keep in your back pocket, if you will, right? We've identified enough sites to meet the requirements of ARENA, and we've had, by every indication, we're satisfying HCD. So if there are other sites that you're aware of, like I say, they might get developed. Like if there's a site that's not developed in your inventory that gets developed during this planning period that's in the city, those numbers still count towards your ARENA, right? You didn't take a hit off of your site's inventory, but you still get credit for those that project that was developed. So it might not be such a bad thing, like I say, to have these sites in your back pocket for the next cycle.
When I promote UGB in the urban growth and the boundary, and also I look at this, but my impression is that is different. That is could be included the city development for the housing, but you just mentioned.
Correct. But it isn't in the city. It would have to be annexed into the city.
It's not in the city limits at the moment. It's in the, yes.
But the UGB is where we have agreed we
Yes.
could go out that far, no farther by vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And should there be an opportunity and something comes along and says, like the intersection of Four Corners there, where there's some really substantial acreage, that may be an opportunity, but I don't think we want to look and include that into
No.
what Mr. Perry.
We don't need
But-
to include that at this point, is what we're saying, yeah.
But I still, I want to leave by myself. I will do my research because that isn't different from my 3 years ago's in the research. Yeah. So now I
Okay,
want
well,
to
let's, and I think that we're gonna clarify that for you, because I
okay.
know what you're talking about, and I understand what you're saying, Mr. Wellender, but let's see if we can get, we'll get a response from the planning director regarding that property. While she's researching that, let's move on. Did
Okay,
you have
yes.
another question?
So far, no.
So
Yeah,
far,
thank
no,
you.
okay. So, okay, follow up.
One last comment,
Sure.
too, just for folks that are here in regards to the letter, that in regards to one of the points in requesting that we work with local philanthropists to identify monies to help build, have funds for building affordable housing, that just know that today within our priority setting meetings that finding funds for affordable housing was a very top priority. So I think that doesn't need to be included within the element that will be happening.
Great. And that was great. Okay, Mr. Gurney, we haven't heard from you yet.
You noticed.
I saved the best for last, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Well, actually,
which would be me, by the way.
so many of my questions have been answered in this wonderful dialogue that's taken place. But I am also familiar with the same letters that Councilmember Farrar Rivas is referring to. And, my concern is you get these letters the morning before a hearing, and how long have we been working on this product? And I know some of these organizations have participated in this process, and of course, new ideas pop up all the time. So I am in concurrence of taking the items in those letters and incorporating them as possible, as long as they are not substantive. And I am just curious, is there a clear definition of what substantive means?
Well, if it doesn't involve, a rezoning, if it doesn't involve some sort of legislative action, I think there's a clear definition, but those, the fact that if it doesn't involve a legislative action, that's one of the
A key.
hallmarks, really. But as I mentioned, increasing meetings from 4 to 5 is non-substantial, or joining
Right.
partnering with an organization,
Right.
non-substantial.
And I noticed a lot of the comments reference to accelerated timeframes, which I'm hearing is perfectly acceptable if that's the decision.
And
to
I
be
would,
made.
the only thing that I would say to that is that, your housing element, for example, this is a 1.5 year long process. So in the implementation programs will take time as well. Doing a rezoning, or rather, not a rezoning, but rather an amendment to the zoning code. Those are things that take time. So you probably want to be a little bit cautious as to how aggressive you want to be with your timelines, making sure that staff and other resources are available to make that happen.
Certainly.
And some of these programs might involve funding, and I don't know if that's coming from the general fund or grant funding or whichever the case may be, but I know that some of them, part of the program might be to identify grant funding for the program to occur. So you could maybe step that up as far as looking for the grant funding, but it's likely still dependent on whether that grant funding, when that comes in.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Take it away, gang.
Thank you so much. So I know that Mr. Willender had some comments regarding the email and the suggestion that I'm hearing both from the Vice Mayor and Council Member Farrar Rivas to adopt the suggestions that are non-substantive. But Mr. Willender, did you have some questions regarding those suggestions?
Yeah, actually,
Please.
a couple. Just for clarity purposes, to make a change in the general plan, it would be a case where the information such as what was shared from these letters could be brought forth, that it could be brought to our planning director, and then that could become an agendized item for a planning commission who would then take that into consideration with their knowledge and their experience as far as, whether or not that they concur with it, and of course if it doesn't, and someone feels it's unfair, it could come back to us, I suppose, for an appeal. But I would really like to suggest that anything that is upzoning or anything that is substantial, that we have the time to be respectful and take it back to the Planning Commission, who has been given the charge, not to say that we can't overrule it, but I think they have a process that is much more comprehensive than we're able to display tonight in such a short period of time. So I love the fact that we can make some changes or some additions. I hate the fact that we have a gun to our head, but I accept the liability of why we have it at our head. But it's comforting to know that should we want to make some changes, but I would just, I have no problem with these minor changes. I just didn't know what that last one was about the environmental.
And that actually might be substantial, because it probably would be a joint powers act, that you would come together with the county and, look to get funding and support to actually be able to implement some projects. So, what it could say, though, in the element would be that we would be research that, the possibility of becoming a member. Yeah.
That seems like a reasonable alternative, and one that I'm seeing head nods would be acceptable. Okay. So my only comments, and most of them were answered, has to do with, I think, Mr. Wellender's original question. That is that, let's say a site develops on West Napa Street, a large property that's now commercial, and then 500 units are able to be built there. What happens to the vacant properties that we've identified in this plan? Does it become a penalty? When I was listening to this, does it become a penalty that we can, they now are someone can come in without any sort of discretion and then build on them? What happens to these other identified properties as a result of this?
Well, what could happen, maybe this is a possible cure, but when the seventh cycle rolls around, right, the penalty is this, and right now is that if we've identified a site in our site's inventory that was in the previous housing element cycle or 2 cycles before, I think what the law is doing is saying that, okay, well, this site isn't working for what you're telling us it's supposed to be doing. Something's wrong. So the law comes into effect to make it easier to develop on that site. So maybe the solution then is, when the next housing element cycle comes along, you don't identify that site, and then that's potentially cured. You're no longer at risk on that site, that specific site, for something to be developed there by right, if you choose. I think that Sonoma has a little luxury that other cities don't, in that there are available sites that are out there. So, that I think is one possible cure for what I think you're concerned about.
So the only problem with all these potential sites that we're so enriched by is we don't own any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really, I looked at the map, and we don't own any of those sites. So it's nice that they're there, but it's not really up to us. We're really at the sort of mercy of the owners and the developers who might work with them to then develop them, of course, going through our planning process and so forth. But sort of tagging along with what Ms. Ferrar-Rivas said at our meeting earlier today, we did identify the need to raise revenue so that we could then purchase sites so that we could be a little bit in charge of our own destiny. Because it's nice to have these sites identified. It would be even nicer to have them identified as sites that were owned by the city of Sonoma, that we could then, with partners, build what we know needs to be built. I think you would agree with that. And I'm just curious, in your experience, is this atypical, or what happens in similar cities under these types of constraints?
I'm sorry, I don't.
In other words, all these other cities similarly situated where they don't own all of these sites that are identified, and is there any, what happens? Do you have any insights for us as to what we might be able to do aside from the revenue that we're going to raise?
Go ahead.
I may, if I may, just a suggestion. In other cities that I've worked in, that I'm familiar with, if you have a housing trust fund, an affordable trust fund, as this city does, and as it grows, you partner with, say, a nonprofit housing developer. Typically, a lot of cities will do a NOFA funding availability, notice of funding availability, and a nonprofit would come in and say, can we borrow that money from to purchase the land. They find the site that meets all the needs of affordable housing. So that's typically how you end up. It's a nonprofit partnership with the city using the housing trust fund, and so that does happen to get greater numbers of affordable housing.
And so we need to grow our affordable housing trust fund in order, because right now, I mean, it's not, I don't think there's much in there to draw in a partner. But I was just curious if this is fairly typical under these, that all of these, literally 100% of these identified vacant properties are not owned by the city.
So let me add, when we were here at the Planning Commission 3 weeks ago, one of the planning commissioners spoke about the city's history developing affordable housing when the city had a redevelopment agency. And having come from that background, I'm completely sympathetic to that. So no, there are some cities that might still have sites that are left over from redevelopment that they're trying to, but they're required now to sort of unload those sites. But otherwise, the jurisdictions that we're looking at, no, I'll take Sausalito, for example. Sausalito is considering developing on City Hall property. It's one of the sites that they own and that they have control over. But no, you're not alone in that you don't have this inventory of city-owned land that is available for development.
Thank you, and I kind of knew that, but I just want to say that because I think the public will see that and say, oh, the city has X amount of parcels for development. It's like, we don't really, they're there. Yeah. We don't really have them in the sense that have meanings, the literal meaning of ownership. We don't own them. They are there, they are opportunities, but they are only opportunities for if we have a willing partner or we have revenue. And I just want to clarify that, because I don't want it to be assumed by the public that somehow we have 500 vacant parcels that we could build on, because we do not. Thank you. Mr. Gurney.
I just need for the record to correct what I had said. The email was actually sent with the 2 letters on January 25th. And so they were distributed earlier than I thought. Okay. I stand corrected.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good. But either way, we're going to, because we're flexible and we want to do good things, we're going to try and do them. So,
Just a small.
yes, please.
Question to our interim city manager, our interim planning director, and to Mr. Banner. I guess I'm a slow learner, and I just am trying to understand the ramifications of cycle number 6. Based upon the illustration you gave me for cycle 5 and the fact that we had some residual lots that weren't developed and that now they are by right. Now, does that suggest that, well, I'll just be optimistic, we had 598 identified in this element, of which, just say, due to definition, we may have 150 sites that don't get developed. Does that mean at the end of the 6th cycle, as we enter into the 7th, that those 150 are going to be exposed by right to development. And the reason I am stressed is that there's been a significant movement by Sacramento to take away local oversight. And this is just another insidious kind of way for Sacramento to come in and tell us, no, you now, because you didn't use it. And that's why I am disappointed if our city manager and city planning director okayed 598 sites. So please set my mind at ease.
So, the first thing I want to do is just to correct you so that we're on the same page as far as the sites are concerned. What we try to do is identify capacity.
Well,
So I
opportunities, just.
so it might
protect-
be I can't recall the number offhand, but it might be 70 sites that got identified that have the capacity for generating 500 units
Based upon zoning, current zoning, correct?
based upon current zoning.
Okay.
Okay. So, and your concern is that if those sites don't get developed, are they then at risk of this government code coming into effect?
Just
and
like it
then-
would be in the fifth.
Right.
Correct. That's my concern.
And just remember, there's conditions that need to apply. Okay, if it's a non-vacant site that was identified in the 6th cycle, and we're using that again in the 7th cycle, then if we do choose to use that again in the 7th cycle, and it wasn't developed, then yes, if a developer comes in and meets certain criteria, then there's a possibility that they would be allowed to develop something by right on that site. If it's a vacant site, it has to be identified in the previous 2 housing element cycles. So there are,
Two.
there are conditions that are applied.
And of the 598 opportunities, housing units, would you say 75% of them were generated from vacant lots, and maybe 25% were generated from occupied or non-vacant parcels?
I can give you that breakdown in
I'm
just a
just
second.
curious.
I just need to find the table. Bear with me. Laura, do you have it like right in handy?
There are 266 vacant sites of the total 598. 266 were on.
Units or sites?
Oh,
It'll be units.
units, but on 8 sites. Or are these? Oh, I'm sorry. Are those just zoning district? I'm sorry. I don't know the number of sites.
Okay.
Yeah, just to put it into reference, the breakdown right now, roughly speaking, is that 2/3 of the sites that are identified in the sites inventory come from vacant sites.
Okay.
And the other third comes from underutilized sites.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's all.
And also there's a small amount of accessory dwelling units that are making up the capacity too.
And those are anticipated ADUs, right?
Correct. It's a little, so in fact, what we're allowed to do is based on the city's progress over the past 3 years, just do a straight line projection. So it's anticipated that 64 ADUs will be constructed. What we're seeing in most cities is that number is kind of increasing exponentially. People are really coming on board. So there might be more ADUs that get developed, and that'll all, work in your favor in terms of meeting your arena.
Right.
But 64 units are coming from ADUs.
And projection. Thank you.
Correct.
Any more questions from the council before I open it to the public for comments and questions? And then we'll come back to the council. Don't worry. You know me. If you have something to say, I'm going to let you say it. I'm going to be here. All right. And in the meantime, we'll just want to make sure that Councilmember Ding's question regarding whether or not that property is within the city limits, the Doyle property, will answer your question before this is over. So any comments or questions from the public, please?
Good evening, City Council. Caitlin Cornwall, Sonoma Valley Collaborative. I'm really relieved, Mr. Gurney, that you pointed out that we hit send on that letter on the 25th, because I was sort of the secretary of that that effort.
We just received it today, just for clarification, because it says 125 on it, but we received it in an email at 131.
How is what? Well, I want to ask you later how to avoid that happening in the future, because that's not good. It did go out on the 25th. Anyway, I just want to sort of reemphasize one of the main points of that letter, and it goes to something that Mayor Lowe just talked about how the city doesn't own these sites, and really all that the housing element can do for these sites is to set the table and be inviting for developers to come and build what we want. And over with the process of this housing element, the members of Sonoma Valley Collaborative and I have been sort of trying to zoom out continuously, like with all these hundreds of little rules and incentives and policies and programs. Do we really think this is going to result in, the change that we need? And one of the conclusions of that thought process is it is so important that the housing element lay an inviting table for nonprofit housing developers of 100% affordable projects. And those need to be of a certain size. And if we lay the table right and let them know that we've laid the table right, they should come. So some of the things that they need are items in the development code about height and about setbacks. It seems to the members of the collaborative crazy that our commercial corridors along Highway 12, West Napa and Broadway are limited to 36 feet, which in some of the rural residential zones is meant to mean 2 stories. That is not something that our members want to see. We want to see more height on those commercial corridors. Getting more height means a bigger building that makes it possible for 100% affordable buildings to be built there. So, and the same with setbacks. Right now, the smallest setbacks in the city that we could find looking through were 15 feet. And the setbacks are greater if you have a taller building. And that doesn't make sense either. So hopefully those could be seen as non-substantial changes that could be more inviting, could bring in developers. And then another, because we're also working with the county housing element, there's something that they're doing at the county that might address some of Mr. Wellender's concerns. Not an expert on this, but what they've done is decide to revise and revisit their inventory every year. So that allows them to have a smaller pad. So they're just they're able to adjust as they go along through their 8 years. And it just leaves less likelihood that at the end you're going to have a bunch of units left over that you might not be able to use for the next cycle. So that's something maybe to ask about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please.
Hello. My name is Paul Kangas. I don't know if you're aware of this new law that was just passed. It was a law that Christina Chen and I wrote and helped develop and lobby for 5 years ago. It's called Senate Bill 9 and 10, which sounds like that what you're talking about would fit perfect. This is a law that allows the building of fourplex houses with 100 solar panels anywhere in any place in California, no matter what the zoning laws are. The advantage of this type of housing is it decentralizes the generation of solar energy into a small project where there's a one owner, 3 tenants. It's a stable investment. The banks like this type of housing. I've researched this project for 40 years. I spent 40 years lobbying for this in Sacramento and finally passed it in 2021. But it decentralizes the generation of solar, puts more power into the hands of the working class, because a homeowner and a young family can develop one of these fourplex houses with solar. And in Germany, where it was developed, the houses were paid 99 cents a kilowatt hour for feeding solar onto the grid. So this is the law Christina and I tried to pass, but we didn't get the part about the money coming in to the owners. In fact, PG&E and the utilities are going the opposite direction. They're trying to block the right of solar home owners to make money from selling solar energy onto the grid. And this is the wrong direction. And history is going to go in the other direction. I mean, solar money solar energy as money for working class people is better than cryptocurrency. It's better than gold. I mean, it's free. It's coming from an unlimited source. And if we can get millions of these fourplex houses built where they're owned by local people, families, and they can rent them out to tenants, it creates a stable housing market. It creates more housing in a decentralized way, which fits easier into cities that don't have huge parcels, where you just have maybe a lot. You can develop these fourplexes onto the full lot. Freiburg, Germany is where they developed this thing, and it totally changed Germany's goal on energy. Their goal in Germany was to shut down all the nukes using fourplex houses with solar panels. They have shut down all the nukes in Germany. They have one left, and they promised to shut it down on Earth Day next year, but I'm not sure that's going to happen because of the mess they're in now. But just the same, if you haven't heard of Senate Bill 9 and 10, you need to look at it. I believe this is a useful tool for Sonoma to develop more affordable housing, decentralize in a way that instead of building big projects, you build these smaller fourplexes that allow people to buy into the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more comments or questions? Please.
Robert Demler, 649 First Street West, Sonoma. Apparently my interest tonight cannot be dealt with tonight because it's been deemed substantial, I believe. I'm part of the West Side Story, and I always have been in Sonoma. 15 and a half years in the half a block from the plaza on West Spain, and 10 and a half years, a block and a half from the plaza on First Street West. I want to support Councilperson Patricia Ferrara-Rivas's interest in spreading the wealth in Sonoma to the east side, because it seems like on the west side we get everything that's left over that's been opposed, and we have the working people and we have the retired people, and generally they don't go to meetings. So they're really unrepresented until we got our mayor. And I'm glad she always is touting the west side, and I appreciate that very much. But whenever you can, I think this disparity, this imbalance, if you will, needs to be addressed. And I and others on the west side would appreciate it very much. That's what I have to say tonight. Thank you very much for all your time. This is very complicated. I'm sorry you're under the pressure of a gun tonight. Whatever.
Thank you so much.
Hello, City Council. My name is Fred Allebach. I live at 19550 8th Street East. And I got a lot to say, so I'm going to be nervous if I just have 3 minutes here. But I have...
Mr. Allebach, we'll be generous with your time. Just be as quick as possible. Thank you so much. Don't be as long as your emails. Thank you so much.
I think I have some non-substantial recommendations that I don't believe that the current regional disparity analysis is complete that like HD asked for. So I would like to ask that the disparity in income segregation analysis be beefed up. Maybe their space can be left to add a more detailed study of local demographics. That I don't feel like the housing element painted an accurate picture of what Sonoma Valley is really like. It said that it should be regional, but the Springs, the urbanized area of Sonoma Valley is actually larger than the population of Sonoma, so it won't do any good for the housing consultant to compare Cotati or Petaluma. We need a comparison of Sonoma Valley and what the conditions are here. So I think that analysis should maybe leave some open for ongoing demographic work that might inform later upzoning that you would do. I had had really hoped that I would be able to make some comments about the site inventory, and I was dismayed to see that that's cast in stone, and that at this point that would be a significant or substantial change. And I don't think that the housing element has not done what it says it has done, that new opportunities will be given in higher resource areas, because all of the lower income housing is on the west side, except for 10 units at First Street East project, and also the project down at Four Corners. So it's really not true that the very low and low income units are spread across town. It's lopsided to the west side, as Robert Demler said. And and apparently I hadn't come here to beef about my comment situation and how my comments seem to have been misplaced, but I don't believe that you all have received my comments until today or maybe yesterday. And so obviously those comments were not able to be integrated into this current housing element draft, so that that basically has nixed all my detailed comments that I went through the housing element in great detail for months working on this. So that's very disappointing. And so I think that what HCD said about public comment is that they'll be looking to see how the consultant integrated public comment, and if they were not integrated and only non-substantial changes can be made, that just doesn't seem like a right situation. Because I don't believe that my asks for changing the site inventory are trivial asks, but they are not going to be able to be included. So I think that's a problem for the city's housing element, and so I'm a little nervous now because of that here. But I would like to ask for those studies to be beefed up. And I guess I'll leave it at that. I made a lot of comments. I went through this on a point-by-point basis, and I just don't see that really being addressed here. So I'm disappointed, and what can I say?
Thank you. Are there any other comments, please?
David Burgode, 240 Del Rio Paseo, and I concur with Fred that you spend a lot of time researching, making comments, submitting them, and they just get thrown right out. They're not acknowledged or anything. My view of this is that once again we're ratifying the gentrification of Sonoma. We're acquiescing to housing production and land use policies that are ethnically and economically exclusive. Despite, over the years, an overproduction of market rate housing and a massive underproduction of affordable housing, it's still the same old thing. If we wish to affirmatively further fair housing, you do it by building housing for protected classes. We don't need 150 pages of documents. That's really pretty clear. Going back to the biggest elephant in the room here is the urban growth boundary. If we build market rate housing on all the land that's left within the city of Sonoma, and then it's impossible to build out underneath, we're guaranteed to continue this problem until all of a sudden we go, oh, gee, there's no more land for affordable housing. Tough. We can't do anything about it now. This is, for example, an instance of Sonoma basically acting as a wholly owned subsidiary of the DeNova, not de novo, but DeNova Housing Development Corporation, which has been systematically buying up all the vacant property and building market rate housing in which there's a few token gestures towards inclusionary. Inclusionary, if we are dealing with producing 15 or 20% of the housing for 60% of the population, the problem just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Some of my questions that I submitted were not really answered. The previous redevelopment funding that the city used to acquire land and then issue a RFP for affordable housing, a great program, and that's what worked for many years. A portion of that money has gone into the city's general fund. I think we need to go back and recapture that and allocate that permanently towards the housing trust fund instead of whatever it's going to right now. my request for a residency requirement on all new housing that's built, particularly the market rate housing that's going for as second homes or speculation, that was completely blown off in the comments that came through. And I think that's something we really need to look at. The response was that, oh, if we do that, then it won't be so attractive to develop market rate housing. My point here is in an urban growth boundary situation where you can't create any more new land, market rate housing is the enemy of affordable housing. I repeat, the enemy of affordable housing. It makes it impossible to develop any affordable housing if companies like DeNova are coming in and producing maybe 1 unit out of 10 or 20 that's actually affordable. And moderate income housing comes in at 119.9%. It's like a family of four making 120 or 140,000. That's maybe helpful, but not really the problem we need. But it's, again, the same thing over and over again. I would suggest that, some people aren't aware of what's going on. I would also suggest that for some people, this is deliberate, that the idea is to create, as been stated by a previous city council member last year, that building affordable housing might make Sonoma less attractive for tourists. The hell with that. Pardon me. That was really deliberate and shameful. Very specifically, if we have some land and it's denoted in this document as being suitable for affordable housing, place an affordable housing overlay zone on that and make it truly suitable for affordable housing and prohibit it for anybody else to develop it for any other reason than affordable housing. And that goes for the Doyle site over at 5th Street East and Napa Road. Lock these things up for affordable housing. The nonprofit developers will come swarming to work with the city. But otherwise, it's just more of the same.
Thank
you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments from the public regarding this item? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close public comment.
Madam Mayor, would you like to take comment from Zoom?
Oh, please, absolutely. How could I neglect Zoom? Thank you so much.
I'm going to be bringing in Caleb Weeks. Just one moment.
Thank you so much.
Hello, Mayor Lowe. Yeah, you scared me there for a moment, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this evening. My name is Caleb,
Caleb.
Policy Director with. Sorry, say again. My name is Caleb Nixon, Policy Director of Generation Housing, and I just want to provide some brief comments. We are very pleased to see the pro-housing designation included in the housing element, as well as the pursuit of vacant parcel tax, which has the possibility and the potential to actually feed the Affordable Housing Trust Fund we've been discussing tonight. While all of those things are great, and there's certainly other things that are great as well, there are some concerning things that we still want to see addressed. And before I actually proceed any further, I just want to say I am a little bit concerned about the pattern we've seen here in terms of, community engagement or comments for the housing element seemingly being misplaced or not integrated into the document. That is, and the fact that this is something that's happened, I think now twice, is deeply concerning and something that should be reviewed so we can have processes in place to ensure it doesn't happen again. The other thing I would like to note is I would like to second actually the comments made by Caitlin Cornwall and some of the other speakers as well, pertaining to building height. We should really be taking advantage of zoning overlays, especially along West Napa Street. We should be instituting an overlay that allows 4 to 5 stories, 20 to 30% affordability, something along that spectrum, because really that's going to be what's going to invite people to come and build. And we should also be looking at reducing setbacks considerably for those areas. They are commercial arterial routes. We should be taking advantage of that and really trying to concentrate our growth there. And I would really, really encourage, and I look forward to actually working with the planning team to help drive really robust policies as we, progress further into 2023 and 2024. And some of the other things, I can definitely discuss with you offline. I don't think it's going to, change here tonight, but I would just really encourage that the city conduct thorough outreach, not only with affordable housing developers, but with organizations that are vested in producing more housing and producing a variety of housing, diversity of housing that supports all people in the community. Because I don't think it's a secret that the planning director lived in Sacramento, or the former planning director lived in Sacramento. 60% of the Sonoma Valley Hospital staff, I don't think, and I could be incorrect about David Storr, but the one thing I know is true, though, is Sonoma Valley Hospital, a good chunk of their staff can't live in the city of Sonoma. And that to me is shocking. And I know a number of organizations are facing a similar issue, which is deeply concerning. And it's a growing pattern, a trend that is growing progressively worse. So we stand ready to help and work with the community, and we're grateful for the opportunity again to speak tonight. And thank you very much for the council members for being here, and a special thanks to Councilmember Farrar Rivas for actually raising our letter. I deeply appreciate it, and thank you for catching that. And with that, I'll close my comments, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weeks. Are there any other comments?
Just brought in Bryce Jones.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bryce Jones. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to comment tonight on this. I definitely really like what I've heard from a bunch of the council members. Love that you guys are including some of these points this evening, and certainly want to voice my support for higher density projects. One of the great things about increased density on some of your major thoroughfares is it's a really efficient use of land. And as council members have pointed out tonight, there's a limited number of sites to develop on in this cycle. And planning for future cycles, the more density you can encourage now is the more land you've preserved for housing in the future. So I really think that's a great policy and something I certainly like to support. And once again, just thank you for commenting.
Thank you so much. Any further comments?
Yes, it looks like we're going to be bringing in Margaret DiMatteo.
Very good.
Margaret, you can begin.
Hi, thank you. And will you just give me a heads up if I get to 3 minutes, but I'll try to keep it short. So my name is Margaret DiMatteo. I am the housing policy attorney of Legal Aid of Sonoma County, and I really just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I've been working very closely with many of those that you know and have heard from tonight on this housing element plan, as well as all the other housing element plans around the county, for months now. And, I want to lift up the comments of Caitlin Cornwall and Fred Allebach and Bryce Jones, some coalition partners, as well as Cal Weeks. The letters we sent out last week on the 25th, I don't know what happened. I can verify they went out because they were forwarded to me, and I signed on to them. But I just would ask you to revisit that commentary. We took a lot of time on this, and that was kind of our final thoughts. And I'm also aware of much of Fred's comprehensive and highly technical analysis that it's been left out of the public input process. And, I was really sad to see that, especially when you all did such a good job of incorporating public comments in that chart you prepared. And
Can you
showing
turn up the
exactly where
volume,
that
please? It's
comment-
hard for us to hear.
Oh, sure. I'll get a little closer. Can you hear me a little better?
Much better. Thank you so much.
No problem. Let me think of where I was at. So, the commentary of Fred, Bryce, all of the people you've heard from, when I looked at that chart incorporating the public comment and how it was incorporated, I was very impressed because y'all are the only jurisdiction that really did something so comprehensive. You said what people asked for, and you said where you took action. And you took bold action, you know, in ways that are really close to my heart, which is tenant protection. You know, there's 3 P's in housing element, but the protection aspect doesn't get a lot of attention. And you gave it just attention, which is to pass a rent registry, which is the fundamental basis for knowing the state of the housing crisis in Sonoma. And then with that registry, you'll be able to do, you know, rent stabilization and just cause eviction protection. And there's a lot of other things that can stem from that. So I just want to commend you all for committing to that. I'm not going to lie, I might have got a tear in my eye when I read that in your housing element plan, because it is so far forward thinking compared to the other jurisdictions in Sonoma County. Much closer to Marin to our south, who's been, you know, taking more progressive action in that regard. So thank you for that. But what I noticed was missing from that chart was Fred's commentary. So I just asked that if there are any other opportunities for amendment, I know it's not going to be tonight, but that you revisit his analysis. I don't know anybody that's probably put so much personal attention and hours and time into that thoughtful and thorough and heartful analysis of housing element with the perspective of, you know, the Springs and the Valley. Anyhow, that I think should conclude my thoughts. Thank you so much for your work on this. And, you know, legal aid is available to help provide technical assistance on the tenant protection pieces. We're doing that in Petaluma, and I'm happy to help with this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next commenter.
That's everyone. Callum Weeks is still raising his hand. I don't know if he's wanting to comment again. We typically
Or
allow.
he maybe just, his hand is still raised. Okay, Caleb may want to check your monitor and see that your
It's
hand
down.
is, it's
That is
down.
all.
Thank you. We usually do not allow a second comment if it's very quick. Please. I don't want anyone to feel like, especially with the discussion of comments not being received in a timely manner, I want to go overboard to make sure that everyone tonight feels that their comments are welcome. Please go ahead.
Okay. My name is Paul Kangas. I live at 193 West Verano here in Sonoma. The New York Times ran an excellent article yesterday on funding these exact kind of projects, that all kinds of philanthropists are looking for places to put money that target climate problems. And solar housing, which I talked about, I think is exactly one of the 10 most important things that we have to do. So I just want to recommend that article.
Thank you.
I forgot to mention the law, Senate Bill 9 and 10, was passed because of a woman named Christina Chen, myself, and Senator Scott Wiener. We ran into him. She introduced him to me, and we all started talking, and all of a sudden he said, yes, and he wrote these laws and slammed it through Sacramento.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Alabak.
I just want to follow up on a couple of things about my comments. From what I understand, there's a packet now that has some of my comments and a summary of those. But like Councilmember Gurney said, if these things come in the day of the hearing, then there's no possible way that you'd have a chance to review those, and there's no way that those were reviewed in the context of producing this current draft of the housing element. Now I want to point out that the story of how my comments got lost is not consistent. It doesn't add up. What Wendy Atkins told me was that the city staff inadvertently sent one folder. There was 2 housing element folders, and staff inadvertently only sent one to the consultant. When you look at the city public comments folder for the housing element, there's 2, and build this up a little bit. Up until today, the only public comment I had was one about indexing. That was the only one. Now, these 2 public comment folders, both of them had more than one comment from me, and one of my comments in September of 22 was to call out that the initial housing element said that there was no history or pattern of segregation in Sonoma. So I wrote a letter in 9/22 that challenged that, and then in the next iteration of the housing element, that was retracted. But in those two folders, there was more than one comment from me. So if only one got sent to the consultant, that means that they got more than the one comment about indexing that I had. So it doesn't really add up that they only got one folder. The story's not consistent. So when you have a situation like that and no one really addresses what happened, then I don't think that's worth looking into, especially since that some of the nature of my comments about the site inventory being imbalanced and not addressing segregation, not addressing affirmatively fair housing, it's now too late because that's substantive and it's cast in stone in the site inventory. So these things all add up to a not a good situation, and I don't know who dropped the ball, because the city said they didn't. The consultant has never said anything to me about how they just got one folder, but why they had only put the indexing comment and not any of my other comments. So, I don't think I'm that great that you would take all my comments, but I would think about of my efforts that some of them might be substantial. And so now there's a packet with my comments here, but I'm sure that there's no way that they went into this housing element draft, and the Planning Commission didn't get them, and they recommended the housing element to be approved without any of those comments in, and now they come in at the last day. So it's not right.
Thank you. All right, so public comment is closed. I want to turn this back to the council and find out what your pleasure is. A couple of things have come up. Specifically, the letter that Ms. Farrar-Rivas brought up. And I'd like to, and I heard what I thought was a consensus that the items that were contained in the letter that were non-substantive and could be added to be included. But I want to say that out loud and see if there are any further comments on that, or if we can go ahead and indicate that we can move those forward.
I just have one quick question. I'm assuming that the height issue is substantial, or can that be changed?
The one thing that I do want to point out is that under one of the programs involving zoning code amendments, there is an amendment to raise the height limit to 36 feet with there's some analysis that's required, or justification rather, that a developer that was coming in that was asking for that would then be required to sort of make it clear that they're required to sort of hit that height limit. So we could at this time, if you wanted to change it, if you wanted to add a zoning code amendment to that program to say that you want to raise the threshold of the height limit in the city, then we could still do that at this time. But that's to the discretion of the city council.
I think that the request is to a specific area. So, but to raise the height limit for a specific area, that would be the area that is on Highway 12. Let me get it, make sure I have it right.
I heard West Napa and Broadway, basically.
Highway 12,
Highway
West
12.
Napa, and Broadway, and raise that so that it would allow for 4 to 5 stories. But the other thing would be to reduce the setbacks. And so whether or not we make that language in there now, but we add that is something that we will look at, as whether or not that's what areas it would be feasible to raise the height limit and also to decrease the setbacks.
We could add, I'm going to just bring up the program. We could add something to the program that goes on to say that the city will analyze increasing the height within this particular zoning district. So I would say that's a non-substantial change.
Oh, good.
I personally would really like to see that, and that was going to be in my final comments. And the setbacks. Is the setbacks also something that we could do in a similar manner?
Well, I think that the key right now is to say that we'll analyze doing that, and
Mhm.
then
But both of those things, yes. And I just want to say, I mean, I think the questions and so forth have been great, and many of you know I visited our sister city earlier this month, and I just want to say everyone says, oh, how charming, oh, how beautiful it is in France, and I want to tell you they have 0 setbacks in these charming villages, 0. These are gorgeous houses that have stood the test of time, obviously renowned for their beauty and not their front lawns. And they're absolutely gorgeous, and many of them go straight up from the street, and maybe there's some nice something in the back. But people say we want Sonoma to be like a European style. We already have a town square, which most cities do not have, and people are absolutely envious of it. So we can build a town that is graceful and beautiful and doesn't have setbacks and has 4 stories. And I've just come from seeing many villages and towns that look like that, and I think Sonoma could be absolutely gorgeous if we do that. So anyway, that was I haven't spoken much tonight, but on those 2 items, on the height and the setbacks, I definitely concur that it will be no harm to the beauty of our city to do that.
I just going to need some specificity, though, on the area that you want to zero in on.
Please, absolutely. No, let's have some discussion.
I think that the consideration is justified, but I think this is the wrong dais to do it. I think, again, we are looking at it in a very myopic way that is in response to some heartfelt comments that are worth considering. But we have a planning commission that has taken a much deeper dive in looking at our town, wrestling with the same things that we've talked about up here, but they are doing it in a much more comprehensive way. My recommendation would be that we direct the interim planning director to note our request for additional evaluation of heights and setbacks, and that be a point of discussion in a subsequent planning commission. I also, in the same vein, and I'd love to get comment from either the interim city manager or the interim planning director, is that I too am disappointed with the breakdown in communication between the solicited comments from the public, which we solicited, and the receipt of them. And it may be too late to do much in terms of thoughtful review because of, again, the gun to our head. So what I would be advocating would be, let's go ahead and adopt the draft of the housing element tonight, and then ask staff, ask our planning director and our city manager that we would like very much, as Perry now has 90 days, correct? Or 60? 60 days to do his final response to the comments that came from HCD, that would give the Planning Commission an opportunity to possibly review some of the comments that for some reason didn't get in a timely fashion, that could be brought to planning, that could give some consideration to some adds. It could be also expressed about the concerns of setbacks and heights. But I just don't, and we have the luxury of making 3 or 4 amendments to the planning general plan in a calendar year. So I would strongly recommend that we take a deep breath. We recognize that these are valid considerations to consider, but there's a lot of linkage throughout, and I think that it would be not only respectful to the Planning Commission, but I think it would also be respectful for the individuals that have brought these comments up to think that we're going to take it through a more thoughtful place.
Okay.
Councilmember, if I
yes, please. I know you want to answer the timeline, please.
Okay, great. The key, of course, to meet the statutory deadline is for adoption tonight. And yes, we have a little bit of flexibility as to when we need to submit the document to HCD, but we'll be submitting it this week.
It's not 60 days, it's this week.
HCD has 60 days to review the document. Okay.
But what if they come back with more comments? You're not going to say
and I will say that there's a strong likelihood that they will.
Okay. So then what do? You respond to
we'll respond to their comments.
And so in that period of time, would we not have the opportunity to, if it is deemed by both the planning commission and supported and approved by the city council, to ask you to possibly make some additions.
Sure. And so I want to back up one step further, okay? And I'm reminded that my colleague Beth, who's one of the primary authors of this document, has actually been very diligently responding to Mr. Alabak's comments, as noted in that matrix, which is not unique necessarily to Sonoma, but it's robust.
This is
okay?
you mean talking about what we've received tonight?
Yeah. And there were, as you know, there were a number of comments, and I can't really speak to, the timing of having received those comments, but Beth was busy working on responding to those comments this week. And so there are going to be, some non-substantial changes that might come to the document based on Mr. Alabak's comments that will be, that will be incorporated into the housing element that will be sent to HCD. So I want, although there might have been some issue with how we ended up getting the comments, we have them now. We've received them. We're doing our best to address them. But I just want to say that although my experience thus far with this housing element cycle is that there will probably be some comments that come from HCD after the 60 days, fingers crossed there's not. I mean, what you want is a certified housing element, and really the last thing you want to do after getting a letter from HCD saying that your document is certified is to open up the can of worms to then start amending it. But you're right in that once you have the certified document, there's the opportunity to do general plan amendments, and you can,
And it would be at that point that I really suggest we take the considerations about setbacks and building heights and what specific areas, because again, it would be prudent on our part, I think, to be able to look at things a little bit broader than specific corridors, because there may be other areas that would be justified to either eliminate the setbacks or to lessen the setbacks or to increase the heights. And
Well, I understand your concern. My concern is the timeline. My concern is that in the event that we submit it and there are no comments, we're done. And so I would err in favor of including, because I think the language is sort of permissive. It's not prescriptive in what I'm hearing, that we have some of this language that was brought up in the letter Ms. Farrar-Rivas noted, and what we're saying about the setbacks and the height is not, again, is that we will address them, and then of course they will go to the Planning Commission and so forth for further study and for codification and all of that. In a perfect world, I would say, would it be great to be able to take all of this and bring it back to the Planning Commission and bring it back to the council? We don't have that time. We're doing the best we can. The fact that we will be able to amend the plan 4 times a year is encouraging, but I think it's incumbent upon this council to make a statement tonight regarding our priorities. This is our plan, and I agree with you, Mr. Wellender. It's not perfect. I certainly wish that we could send this back to our Planning Commission and so forth, but I don't think we have that luxury, because if we submit it and they don't send it back to us, we don't have that opportunity, and then we have lost the chance to put in those comments, and I don't want to lose those comments. I'm speaking for myself now.
could I clarify what my comments were? I'm not asking for the whole kitchen sink to go back to the Planning Commission. What I was just simply saying, these were some specific comments about setbacks and heights. But let me finish, please. We do have the opportunity to make some changes down the road. And I don't believe that if we make comments about the height, whether they're prescriptive or just suggested, or setbacks, will necessarily change anything in the next 60 days or 90 days. And so my point is that, again, I believe it would be appropriate to take it through the appropriate channels. Again, I'm not asking for the Planning Commission to look at the whole housing element again. I'm just simply saying concerns that have been brought up, such as what we brought up.
If the language, Councilmember Wallander, if I think what the language we're proposing in regards to heights and setbacks would be broad in that we want to look, we can mention these areas and potentially other, and what we want these areas to be looked at by the planning commissions for areas where we can identify potential areas where there could be higher height prescriptions, if I'm using the correct word, and also less setbacks to be able to accommodate more affordable housing. So it's in the element, many of the programs in the element, what language we have in right now is to analyze something. It's not to necessarily do something. And so that's what we're asking for. And that language is in there, and what it does, I think, for the community, that many members of the community, and I will reiterate, this group of people represents a lot of our community. So I think showing good faith that we are actually taking their words and putting them into the document, and that we're going to move forward, that we're looking at doing analysis, it doesn't give them, we're not saying yes. There's going to be these heights are going to be extended or setbacks are going to be reduced, but we're going to have that as part of one of the programs.
And I
Mayor
think,
Lowe?
yes, please,
Yeah.
Mr. Ding.
You know, we are under pressure. We don't like pressure. Housing element is very important. Today's meeting reminds me of the half year ago when we started from the housing and element. And also I remember that is the Fred Alabak. He approaching to the podium. He said, I already made tons of the comments, but he couldn't see anything on the public comments. It has been already in the 6 months and more. So that led me to think out of the management of these kind of procedures. We have some of the issue. So I look at the email, I was totally assuming on the management and the planning commission and also planning the director, they already received it. That was sent by January 25th. Enough the time and staff to review. So before that, even I had a meeting with a group of people for the writers for this letter. So that I feel very confident. But so today, just this kind of reason. So now I request extension under the reasonable cost. We want to extend for another 7 days or 10 days. We should include those kind of valuable public comments into our housing element. This is kind of the attitude. Just like Mr. Rivers just said, they are our client. But our client right now getting more than we should do. So we request for reasonable and extension. Because just the Laura just mentioned, she didn't receive it. She didn't, maybe some computer problem issue. That is out of control, out of the human controls in the course. So that we are entitled to request extension and also fix the problem without the public comments. This is not only for our housing element. In the future, we have more these kind of thing happen. So we want to make the changes. I want to suggest, see if it's possible.
Well, thank you for your suggestion, and can you respond to the ability to extend?
There's no grace period.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Ding, it's a great idea, and I wish we could adopt it, but unfortunately, we can't.
But if like this, I don't want to approve.
Madam Mayor, if I may, just to help outline the options here, we do have a January 31st deadline to adopt a housing element in order to avoid the risks of the builder's remedy. So one option is to, which is what is before the council this evening, is to adopt a resolution that adopts the housing element as presented and delegates to the city manager the ability to include additional changes that are not substantial modifications. So that would include responding to certain additional comments that haven't been responded to, including some of the discussion this evening. The second option would be to do that same thing, but also to direct staff that we go back and make substantial modifications to the housing element. So we would approve a housing element tonight, but then we would go back to the Planning Commission. We would have another hearing before the Planning Commission that would include possibly substantial modifications to the housing element. And then those would have to come back here again. So that will take additional time. In the meantime, we will have submitted what we adopt tonight to HCD. We may try to wait on that. I'm not sure. We'll have to look at whether or not that's an option. But I think staff's understanding from their discussions with HCD was that we were really close in terms of getting something certified. And so we thought we could get this over the line by January 31st without making substantial modifications to what was presented to the public back in last year and then submitted. So two options: adopt now with the changes that staff can include, or adopt now and then direct substantial modifications to go back through the planning commission process.
Okay, and please
Yes,
think
I
about
like
those.
that.
I want to
Take serious.
call on the vice mayor who has his hand raised so nicely. Thank you.
You're welcome. For the city attorney, how do those two, or the consultant, how do those two actions marry up eventually?
Well, the thing that will kick in tomorrow is the builder's remedy. Okay, so if the direction is to send this back to the planning commission for consideration of substantial changes, that's the route you can go. I mean, there's not, I think it was something like only 73 of the 197 cities in the Skag region were able to submit their housing elements by their statutory deadline. So the city has that option. Right? As the city attorney said, by every indication from HCD, we're very close. We've been trying to address the comments that came from Mr. Alabak in particular and other comments, and we'll continue to do so over the next couple of days as we're sort of getting that document ready to send to HCD. We do have an opportunity, I suppose, over the next 60 days to potentially consider some of these other things so that when we address HCD's comments, if they come, that we can make changes. And for changes like the that will analyze building height and setbacks, that is a change that we can make now before we send the document to HCD.
Thank you. And I want to clarify that in putting in language about we will analyze that doesn't cut out the planning commission's role
No.
at all. So I'm not in any way interested in cutting out the planning commission's role. I want option one, and I'm going to just say why. I don't believe that we're going to gain anything in the next 60 days except a lot of angst over this, opening ourselves up to the builder's remedy. And I don't think it gives us really enough time to make the substantive changes that we may want to make in that time period. I prefer to put in the suggestions that we talked about and then send them to the planning commission for development over in a normal course of the year. And make sure that we also identify going further why our communications got messed up, because that has nothing to do with the housing element, but it's obviously something of concern. I think if we do that, and over the next couple of days, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads that we could bring in these things, the points that were made, and it doesn't prohibit us from doing what Councilman Wellender suggested, and that is to do a deeper dive with the Planning Commission on these things, so that when we bring them back, they're substantive, they're thoughtful, they've gone through the vetting process, and we can do it. So the language that I would like to see is in the option 1 identified by our city attorney, is the identification of these issues in the housing element, and then going forward to see how we can bring them to fruition. I think rushing us now and putting in substantive changes in a week or something like that is not, it cuts out the Planning Commission and doesn't do what we really want to do. And it's unfortunate we're in this position. It's not how we would like. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Ding, that nobody likes being put in this. This is not the ideal, but it's like we're identifying, we're putting a pin in these areas where we're going to come back. And I think it's important to do that so that we have good faith with our community that this is in the document, but how it's going to actually roll out, play out, and be putting the meat on the bones of it will be done through a process that everyone can be a part of. So my preference is in option 1, but I want to hear what everyone else has to say, considering the timeline that we unfortunately are facing.
If I could just add to the one thing that we haven't addressed as far as raising building heights, reducing setbacks, that's a discretionary process that will require a level of environmental analysis. So we're approving a notice of exemption tonight, but that might trigger a mitigated negative declaration. So these are things that, you're correct, they're not something that we can address easily in a short period of time.
And if I may add to that, we have gone out for a general plan update. We have received proposals. We will be reviewing, bringing forward a recommendation to the council for a general plan update, which would include things such as all the zoning changes that you're talking about, height increases, setback increases. That will be part of that analysis that will be done.
That'll be part of the development plan within the general plan?
The general plan.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
But I have a question. Is it compliant? Housing element is a part of the general plan. But right now, we have the 2 versions, right? That doesn't make sense. We cannot say, when we review general plan, we put additional on the points and the description only in the general plan. But this copy is not matched to what we send over.
They would have to be consistent, but if we're saying, as you recommended, to analyze something, that is consistent, because
Okay.
we will be analyzing it with the general plan. We're not saying what the result is yet. So that would still be consistent.
Okay, so option 1 would be consistent, is to mention these things in a descriptive manner and then go forward with the general plan to fully realize them through the planning process and all the other processes. I feel comfortable with that, but let's any more discussion on that.
And the only difference between 1 and 2, David, could you just express the difference between 1 and 2? Because I agree we need to adopt tonight, and I love the process that we could catch our breath. But I was a little bit confused about the difference between 1 and 2.
I think 2 means that you run the risk here of.
There is an option 3 that would run the risk, and I wouldn't recommend that. It would be to adopt an element right now and then essentially immediately amend it by going back through the Planning Commission process.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, I don't think we have the time to really do that in a. No.
Particularly if we have the opportunity to update the general plan as a whole,
Exactly.
of which the housing element is a part.
Correct. Okay.
But I have the, yeah, different, because, of course, right now we look like the student submit, test score, oh, the time deadline is here. But actually, the whole procedure is not right. At this point, at this today, I would like to consider more than a little bit. Of course, I agree with you. We need to meet the deadline. But we should take this an opportunity, change our procedures. This is very important. Very important thing cannot be made a decision and under the pressure. Yeah, we have the tons of the time. Why? We didn't finish this and last month, We need to thinking. We should learn something from this specific case. That is a minor point. We prove that's fine. But in the future, maybe we still repeat it again. I already see that. On the computer system, on the staff, we have the issues. We shouldn't, change it. That is a minor point.
No, and your point is well taken, Mr. Ding. I don't think any of us feels comfortable with these kind of deadlines. I mean, nobody wants that. And yeah, we've had a long time, but there were glitches, and we're going to address them. I can guarantee you it's on my list. I meet with the city manager at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and I think it's item 1. So we will address them. But so at the moment, I'm looking for a motion and some direction.
Madam Mayor, if I may, just real briefly, I know you said you were allowing public comment.
Yes.
We do have an individual with their hand raised on Zoom. I don't know if you want to reopen public comment or if you...
What is the pleasure of the council? Would you feel comfortable opening?
Yes, opening.
Yeah, okay,
comment.
yes, please.
Okay, it's Caleb Weeks.
Oh,
Yeah.
Caleb, his hand is raised, okay. Mr. Weeks.
So sorry for delaying this process, and thank you, Mayor and the Council, for allowing me one more opportunity to speak. I just want to quickly say I really appreciate you guys considering our comments. And yes, I do agree the height discussion and the setbacks. can be
He's
taken
speaking, but I
into
can't hear him.
Caleb, just 1
The
second.
height and set.
Callum, go ahead and start now. For some reason, our volume keeps going down.
So I just wanted to say I do agree. We could definitely take the height and setbacks conversation outside of this and go through the traditional process. Really, more than anything, I wanted to, impress upon the council the importance of utilizing zoning overlays, doing specific and targeted, essentially incentives within the areas of where you want to see develop. And so I'm very excited to work with you about on all of that. I'll leave it there for now so everyone can go home. But thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to further kind of elucidate some of my comments earlier. I do appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm bringing this back to the council. Again, we need a motion to approve. We need a motion. I believe the motion to approve could be inclusive of the comments, to integrate the comments that were non-substantive into the housing element, that I need a motion.
Yeah, I would move to approve the housing element and direct staff to look at the comments presented to us by the group pre-mentioned before. I won't name them all again. I can if you want me to. And to include in the housing element, where possible, those items that are non-substantial changes. And for ones, if they are substantial, if there's potential to add in language, that those areas would be analyzed and then would go, analyzed for future consideration.
And
How
just
about
for
to make an
clarification,
amendment? Send it to the planning commission.
Yeah.
For
The city attorney has a question.
I just wanted to clarify, you are moving to approve the resolution as well and the CEQA exemption.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I meant to say that, of course.
And, okay, hold your question, Mr. Ding. Let's get a second, and then we'll take questions on the motion. Is there a second so that we can entertain questions on the motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Gurney. Okay, now questions on the motion.
Yes.
Mr. Ding.
I would like to add, if the staff find significant changes, we need to send it back to Planning Commission to make an amendment immediately.
Disagree.
Okay, that is not considered a friendly amendment by the seconder. So back to the original motion. So do you have a question, Mr. Ding, regarding process rather than just changing the motion?
Yeah, just the change, because I would like to, because this is the series. Nobody knows right now how much we needed to change, how many issues and those kind of public comments has been addressed. We need to look at it in the detail. Again, these kind of thing is not going to happen today. Today is under the pressure. We should pay respect to the public for these kind of more consideration. I didn't say, we definitely need to go back to the Planning Commission. I didn't say that. I just said, if we see any significant changes, I would suggest send it back to Planning Commission for immediate amendment, and then submit.
So I think we would consider that a substitute motion and
Yes,
need a second for that.
so if you would like to make a substitute motion that we approve this, but if there are any substantive changes, we send it back to the Planning Commission, is that your motion?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a second to Mr. Ding's motion? Your motion fails for lack of a second. We'll go back to the original motion, which is to approve the housing element with the stipulation that we incorporate the non-substantive changes, identify places for further analysis, and then the further analysis will be done through the process of the Planning Commission and through the adoption of the general plan. And this is on the resolution and the CEQA exemption. And we have a motion and a second. Is there any further questions on the motion? Mr. Willen.
Just want to have clarity on that. So are we asking the consultant and the staff to review all of the comments that were in this letter, and then they use their judgment on whether or not something is substantive or not? And if it's not substantive, to go ahead and to fold it into the draft. I feel a little bit uncomfortable about that because I haven't had a chance to actually go through that. I do feel comfortable with what was suggested about the specific comments that fellow Councilwoman Patricia made, and the request to do further analysis of possibly the heights and setbacks. But I don't feel comfortable just simply saying, in review of all the comments that have been put forth, that if they wish to fold it in, they fold it in. I would have preferred there had been some discussion up here.
Well, we had some discussion regarding the letter. Question to the maker of the motion. Could you be specific about the things in the letter that you would like them to fold in if they're non-substantive? I think that would help address Mr. Wellender's concerns.
So I would say the first 1 through 4 of substantive or substantial.
Do you have the letter in front of you, Mr. Wellender? Yes.
Yeah, so those 1 through 4 are substantial, but those are things that we would want to go back to the comments, we would want to go back to the Planning Commission to look at as part of the development plan. When we're doing the general plan, I think we want to look at make Sonoma more welcoming and 100% affordable projects. That section, number 1, that we want them to be meeting with nonprofit developers 4 times a year, not 1 time a year, and to also add in the Housing Land Trust of Sonoma County to the list of invitees. Number 2 is something, the Renewal Enterprise District is something that we would want to, I would assume, as the planning commission, that would go in their purview to review and analyze whether or not that's an option for us, and something that I think the city council would probably look at too, but I think it's planning commission first. And that when it comes to the revised development code along Highway 12 for affordable projects in regards to, allowing for 4 to 5 stories and setbacks, that is something we want to have written within that's going to be analyzed, and that will go to the planning commission.
That's good, and I feel comfortable with all that, except a 5-story building is not 35 feet or 36 feet. And so again, what I'd like to suggest is that rather than responding specifically to a comment that came from the public that said up to 5 stories, I would rather suggest that we reanalyze the opportunities for increased heights and leave it at that, please.
Yes, duly noted.
So how many?
And then number 4 would be this objective to meet with local philanthropists. I think that I think we can add in the language that we are looking for all fundraising grant possibilities to be able to subsidize affordable housing and workforce housing. At all, so ultra low, low, moderate housing. Because we won't have it unless we find subsidies. Excuse me.
Right,
There.
or raise
How's
revenue.
that?
I think that's very helpful. Mr. Wellender, is that helpful to you? Because we're very specific as to what we're addressing here, and I like your language regarding the height. We don't need to be specific, okay.
And the faster timeline, I would say, I think that is actually does need to be up to staff to establish what the timeline is. So I do want it, all of this to be a top priority, but understand the limits of staff and what's possible. So
right,
that would be the only one I'd probably leave off.
Further questions on the motion, Mr. Ding?
Yeah, I would like to say if we follow this procedure, how many days we can submit, and also the state were allowed.
I believe the question is, if we pass the motion, how many days will it take for us to amend the current document and submit to HCD?
I think probably what will happen is we'll have a discussion, if not tomorrow, then certainly just to make sure we're all on the same page, that we have the same notes, we've understood everything correctly. I mean, we'll shoot for early next week to submit to HCD. It'll certainly take us a few days to address some of these things.
Does that answer your question, Mr.
Yes, answer my question. Yeah.
But for builders' protection, by approving it tonight, we've done our job.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So, yes, we've done that. Okay, so, are there any further questions on the motion? And we have answered several questions to clarify with staff. Is staff clear on the motion and our notes? I'm seeing a lot of heads nod. I mean, I'm just checking to see if you're all paying attention, and you are. And I thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to bring this, ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Ding,
Aye.
Councilmember Farrar Rivas,
Aye.
Councilmember Wellender,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gurney,
Aye.
Mayor Lowe.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much for, cobbling it through tonight. Thank you to the public for your patience. Please know we are going to find out why things didn't get to us in a timely manner. It is of great concern. All of us care deeply about the public comments and regard your comments as important. So, and I believe the staff believes that as well. So we'll figure it out. Thank you so much. There are no further other items on the agenda. This is a one-item meeting, and without objection, we are adjourned.